Hello and welcome back to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. Episode 13. Unlucky for some, but lucky for you, as we have another 7 historical stories, complete with song pairings lined up. Although, you may not want to push your luck just yet, as we also have a quiz at the end of the episode. So, you'd best keep your wits about you while listening, as we learn about such stories as how a life of crime can pay off, why the French wanted this topless icon, historically, who is to blame for the podcast, and when Big Ben got its nickname, plus a whole lot more along the way. So, let's kick things off with Monday, April 7th. On this day, not year, a couple of good fellas get rich quick. If you're a long-time listener of this podcast, you'll know I love a good historical heist story. And all the better if no one is injured or shot along the way. So, today finds us at the tail end of just such a heist. But before we get to it, a little backstory first. Henry Hill Jr. was born 1943 in Manhattan, New York City. From a young age, Henry wanted to be a wise guy, a member of the mafia, stating, "I dreamed about being a wise guy, the way other kids dreamed about being doctors, or movie stars, or firemen, or ball players." Then, at age 11, Henry got his wish, working for Paul Vario of the Lucchese crime family. The young Henry Hill was introduced to all criminal activities and partook in some too, earning the trust of Vario. At 17, to avoid the FBI, Henry enlisted in the army. For 3 years, until his discharge, he would continue to practice all he had learned from the mafia. To quote Wikipedia, in charge of kitchen detail, he sold surplus food, loan sharked pay advances to fellow soldiers, and sold tax-free cigarettes. Hill spent 2 months in the stockade for stealing a local sheriff's car. Getting out of the military and back to the life of a wise guy saw Henry spending a lot of time around John F. Kennedy Airport. It was part of his route, selling cigarettes and to check in on Bobby McMahon, also known as Frenchie. Frenchie was the cargo foreman at the airport, and as well as a customer of Henry's, he would also pass on anything left behind, clothes, perfume, jewelry, all for a cut of their eventual sale. He also, it turned out on a January in 1967, would pass on a crucial bit of information. The airport cargo area was building a 7-by-8-foot cinder block storeroom complete with a solid steel door, all for storing sacks full of money. The money was to come from Southeast Asia, specifically the Indochina Bank of Laos. American currency spent overseas and being returned to the country, either for destruction or for depositing back in American banks. Air France would fly these bundles back, parceled up in neat $60,000 linen-wrapped packages. They would routinely be handling millions of dollars a week, storing it in the new storeroom before an armored truck would load it all for transfer. Henry wanted this money, but he had just 2 problems. 1, Frenchie, and therefore Henry, was never given much warning when a shipment would arrive, and 2, how was he going to get into the storeroom? Only one man had the key to the storeroom. To quote Henry here, a guard from a private agency. He had a crew cut and took his job guarding very seriously. He loved being a cop. He loved guarding doors. The guard never let the key out of his sight, attached to his belt on a keyring. He would even carry it with him on his day off, a fact Henry discovered after following the guard home and breaking in when he had left. While he didn't find the key, he did hit onto a new plan. The guard, single, in his 40s, had a lot of quote-unquote girly magazines splayed around his apartment. The new plan? A honeypot. Honeypot, as per Wikipedia, the use of a covert agent to create a sexual or romantic relationship to compromise a target. So, enter the agent in question, a $150 a night lady of the night. Henry described her as looking like actress Natalie Wood. She had black hair, a great figure, and beautiful, big eyes. She didn't look like a hook. She looked more like a student or a stewardess. With the help of Frenchie, the guard and the honeypot were introduced. And eventually, after a rendezvous at a nearby motel with an on-site spa, Henry was able to steal the keys, have a copy made, and replace the whole lot before the guard returned to his room. Henry Hill now had a working key to the storeroom door, and information from Frenchie that not only would it soon be full, but also the very helpful fact that shifts at the JFK cargo area change at midnight, which is also when the one guard takes his coffee break. On this day, April 7th, 1967, just before midnight, Henry and one other associate walk up to Air France cargo building number 86 with a large briefcase in hand. Minutes later, and $420,000 richer, they walk out again, locking the door behind them. Nobody had seen them enter, nobody had challenged them once in, and nobody had seen them leave. As this happened on a Friday evening, the money wasn't even to have been picked up until Monday, meaning it was well over 48 hours later until the robbery was even noticed. While Henry was eventually arrested in 1980, it was for a drug charge and not for the robbery. He would go on to become an informant and snitch on his former gang, an act that led to 50 arrests, and Henry being entered into the Witness Protection Program. If this robbery sounds familiar at all, there may be a couple of reasons for that. Perhaps you've read about it before, in the 1985 book Wise Guy, written by Nicholas Pileggi, which details these events plus many more from the life of Henry Hill. Or, if that wasn't the reason, maybe you saw it in the movie adaptation of the book, in a work that's been referred to as arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career, a quote that's referring to the 1990 movie starring Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, and Joe Pesci, Goodfellas. Air France made me. We walked out with $420,000 without using a gun. Ray Liotta, as Henry Hill, quips in the movie as he is walking out of the airport, briefcase in hand. A song from the Chantels plays in the background, Look in My Eyes. Lyrically, the love song couldn't be farther from the events of our story today, full of honeypots, theft, and mobsters. But just read the comments under the song on YouTube, and you'll agree that this story couldn't be paired with any other song. Tuesday, April 8th. On this day, not year, Master Robin, you've lost your arms in battle, but you grew some nice boobs. If you recognize that quote from the 1993 movie Robin Hood Men in Tights, or just know some generic art history, you may have a good idea what this story will be about. Milos, formerly Milos Island, is, as per one Greek travel agency, one of the most exotic and laid-back Greek islands, sitting in the heart of the Aegean Sea. The agency then also claims one of the island's beaches boasts a lunar landscape that consists of crystal clear, turquoise waters, which is something I must have missed the discovery of on our own moon. This is one small dip for man, but I digress. Milos, from at least 50,000 years ago, was an important island for the humans around the Aegean Sea. The volcanic land was an excellent source of obsidian, a volcanic glass that, through a process known as knapping, could be manipulated into sharp instruments. Over the years, many different cultures and civilizations claimed Milos as their own, setting up settlements on the 160 square kilometre or 61 square mile landmass of the island. As years passed, populations ebbed and flowed until we find ourselves in 1820. Just 20 years prior, the population had fallen to below 500 people after the Ottoman Empire took over the island from the Russians. The numbers quickly rose, growing up to around 5,000 by 1821. With the explosion in population came the need for growth, which is why, on this day of April 8th, in 1820, we find ourselves following farmer Yorgos Kentrotas. As he's digging out a new field, he strikes something unexpected and stops. Over the course of digging around what he had struck, he attracted the attention of a French sailor, Olivier Voutier, who helped the farmer unearth the discovery. Buried within a niche, the duo uncovered the body of a woman, bone white and split in two, her top half naked, while her lower body was covered, fabric draped over her form. The woman was also missing both of her arms. This was no corpse, however. The woman, standing at 6 foot 8 inches, was made from Parian marble and was an ancient sculpture. Olivier recognized what this discovery was and just what it meant for his own country. Just 5 years prior, the French had lost the Napoleonic Wars, and with all that loss, all their plunder had to be surrendered. Artwork by famous masters, classical Greek statues and sculptures, and historically significant pieces, such as the Rosetta Stone, all returned, repatriated to their rightful owners. This loss left the Louvre Museum languishing, and the French art world listless. They needed new pieces to reflect that their culture was one of class, and had a direct connection back to the golden age of civilization, and for that, they needed this sculpture from Milos. Word was sent to Constantinople, now Istanbul, and a larger ship was sent back under instructions of the French ambassador to purchase a sculpture. He had sent his assistant, Marcellus, to oversee the shipment. They were nearly too late, arriving just as the sculpture was being loaded onto another ship. As per a New York Times article from 1928, though the peasant had offered the relic for $150 at first, he had raised the price to several thousand when de Marcellus arrived, and had entered into a bargain with some Greeks, who actually were engaged in transporting the upper half, which was sculpted in 2 parts, with the torso and limbs separate. To cut the following year short, the sculpture was transported back to France, shown off to the king, that's Louis XVIII for those keeping count, and donated to the Louvre. The sculpture was dated to the classical Greek era of the 5th to 4th century BC, and identified as depicting the goddess Aphrodite, or her Roman equivalent, Venus. Hence the name the sculpture was given, Venus de Milo. She was displayed as she was found, armless, with no move made to restore her, under the belief that she was part of a group display and the others needed to be found first. Only, perhaps an error, or perhaps a deliberate deception, to replace their lost classical pieces, this sculpture wasn't from the classical era, and it may not even be depicting Aphrodite. Actually, the sculpture was from the Hellenistic period, which, as per Wikipedia, covers the time in Greek history after classical Greece, between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC and the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BC. It is thought now that the Venus de Milo may have been sculpted by Alexandros, a wandering sculptor who worked between 130 and 100 BC. A part of the sculpture bearing his name was conveniently left undisplayed back in 1821. As for the identity of the statue, many claim it to be Aphrodite, an identification helped on by the apple held in one of her severed arms, a reference to the apple of discord the goddess received from Paris of Troy. Others believe it to depict Amphitrite, the wife of Poseidon, and a god worshipped on Melos. In this interpretation, the apple, rather than a symbol to another story, may actually be a pun. The Greek word for apple sounds a lot like the island where the sculpture would have been displayed, Melon. Old currency minted on Melos even bore an apple, a pun the locals apparently took pride in. While the Venus de Milo continues to be displayed at the Louvre Museum, over the years and the many wars that have threatened Paris, the sculpture has been hidden away with forgeries displayed from time to time. A fitting song for this story is an ironically buried single of Prince, titled Venus de Milo. Recorded for the 1986 movie Under the Cherry Moon, the scene it was used for, and thus ultimately the song itself, was cut from the final movie. Much like the Venus de Milo, it is worth unearthing and displaying this song, as it has a simple beauty to it. And, in another parallel to its namesake, the song only lasts 1 minute and 55 seconds, while a longer recording has been lost to time, almost like displaying the sculpture with missing pieces. Wednesday, April 9th. On this day, not year, au clair de la lune, mon ami Pierrot. Have you ever heard the fact that some inventions predate what they were made for? Buttons are a famous example. They predate the buttonhole by, according to some, at least 5,000 years. Less exciting is when it goes the other way, however. The can opener being created 50 years after the can just doesn't have the same ring to it. I start on this tangent as the item front and center of our story today follows a similar trajectory to the buttonhole. The phone autograph was patented in 1857 by Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville. It was intended as lab equipment to be used in the study of acoustics. Scott de Martinville, born 1817 in Paris, France, originally was a printer. It was in this line of work that he read all about the latest scientific discoveries and endeavors, and it inspired him. Photography was still a relatively new art form, and de Martinville wanted to do for sound what photography did for image. Imagining a world where two speakers could record and transcribe their conversation regardless of speed. A world where, upon waking in the middle of the night, a person could audibly record their dream, rather than fumbling for a pen, or, as de Martinville called it, that instrument that struggles with and chills expression. This led him to create the phone autograph, meaning self-writing sound. The device was, as per de Martinville's own description, a plate of glass with an exceedingly thin stratum of lamp black. Above, I fix an acoustic trumpet with a membrane the diameter of a 5-franc coin at its small end. The physiological tympanum, eardrum. At its center, I affix a stylus, a boar's bristle, a centimeter or more in length, fine but suitably rigid. I carefully adjust the trumpet so the stylus barely grazes the lampblack. Then, as the glass plate slides horizontally in a well-formed groove at a speed of 1 meter per second, one speaks in the vicinity of the trumpet's opening, causing the membranes to vibrate and the stylus to trace figures. Essentially, imagine a needle vibrating from speech or sound and etching those vibrations onto a piece of paper, covered in a layer of dark carbon or soot. A kind of two-dimensional vinyl record leaving behind a visual sound wave. On this day, April 9th, back in 1860, 28 years before Thomas Edison first recorded voice in a wax cylinder, Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville recorded his own voice onto a piece of paper 9 inches tall and 25 inches wide. It wasn't the first human voice ever recorded, but it is the earliest surviving recording of a human voice, reciting the French folk song, Au clair de la lune. Au clair de la lune, mon ami Poirot, prêtez-moi tes plumes. By the light of the moon, my friend Poirot, lend me your quill. Unfortunately, de Martinville would never get to hear his recording. You see, as hinted at the start of this story, while de Martinville had created a device that was capable of, as per the New York Times, measuring and classifying sound waves, something able to record speech, it just wasn't actually able to play it back. That is, until 2008. Late the prior year, a team of audio historians, led by David Giovannoni, began a concentrated search for any surviving recordings made by Martinville. The search led them from their California home to a patent office in Paris, from there to the French Academy of Sciences. At each stop, they made detailed and high-resolution copies of all of de Martinville's recordings, or phonautograms as they were called. The high-resolution images were fed into a machine, and a program designed in collaboration with the Library of Congress made maps of the images, detailing the grooves left behind by the sound waves, and converted them into something that could be played digitally. The first playback of the recording was at too great of a speed, causing the scientists to believe it was a recording of a woman or a child reciting the song. But on slowing the recording, changing the pitch, they heard the voice of Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville. Although long dead, his voice and his invention had proved very much alive, nearly 150 years since he first started experimenting with recorded sound. With the knowledge that phonautograph recordings, once thought only a one-way avenue, can now be played back, who knows what other recordings remain hidden around the world? For the song pairing for this story, I think Wired by Sound by Cliff Richard is an excellent pairing. Without people like de Martinville tinkering with audio and new ideas throughout history, we wouldn't have the music we have today, the audio world we have today, and I sure wouldn't be able to talk to you all over the internet like this either. So, as per Cliff Richard, it's music I've found, and I'm wired for sound. Thursday, April 10th. On this day, not year, ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls from Ben. You may be familiar with the Elizabeth Tower. You may be familiar with Elizabeth Tower, as it was named in 2012. or perhaps you're more associated with the Great Clock of Westminster. In either case, you're sure to know this 96-metre or 306-foot tower by another name, Big Ben. I'm sure a few of you are shouting at me already that Big Ben isn't the name of the tower, but the name of the bell. And while you may be technically correct, the confusion has existed for so long that the identities are interchangeable, with Big Ben being both a nickname for the clock tower and the bell housed within it. The clock tower, whatever you want to call it, was planned out in the new design of the Palace of Westminster, after the previous one had been destroyed by a fire. Charles Barry was to redesign the palace, while Augustus Pugin was in charge of the clock. Both were to be designed in the neo-Gothic or Gothic Revival style, taking inspiration from medieval architecture and designs. Construction of the tower started in 1843 and wouldn't be completed until 1859. The construction was described as a slowly progressing rate of about 17 feet a year. As construction slowly progressed, work could be started on one of the most distinguishing features of the clock tower, the bell. In total, the tower had 5 bells. 4 quarter bells, weighing in at 4.5 ton, 2 ton, 1.5 ton, and 23 hundredweight, or 1,168 kilograms, with each quarter bell sounding a unique note, G sharp, F sharp, E, and B. The 5th bell, Big Ben, sounded an E natural, and weighed in at 13.5 ton. Interestingly, the Big Ben that is installed in the tower today isn't the first Big Ben. During construction of the tower, the first bell, a 16-ton monster, beating the previous heaviest bell by over 5 ton, was cast by John Warner and Sons, and taken to the palace yard for testing. The design of the bell, and the material it was to be made from, were custom, a design put forward by Edmund Beckett Denison, who was in charge of the clock mechanism and design for the tower. John Warner and Sons weren't used to these changes, and it showed in August of 1856. The bell had been hung for testing, and for a while all was good. However, a heavier striker needed testing. The bell was struck, and it couldn't take the force, cracking under the heavier striker. The bell was beyond repair, and a replacement had to be made. Denison turned to Whitechapel Bell Foundry instead. And just under 2 years later, on this day, April 10th, 1858, the bell was recast. After being transported by a team of decorated horses, through streets lined by cheering pedestrians, the bell was ready to be winched into position. An 1858 newspaper article tells of the bell chamber and the area directly above it, where the scaffolding that was to hoist Big Ben into position sits. Slowly the visitor climbs, with cold, trembling hands, creeping from ladder to ladder, catching through Gothic openings now and then a dizzy glimpse of the roofs and the tops of lofty buildings, with the mighty city half hidden in its smoke, spread like a map down far beneath him. By July 1859, the bell was installed and ready to test, first chiming out on the 11th of the same month. The bell lasted 2 months before, in September, it too cracked when struck. While the old saying goes, 3rd time's a charm, or maybe chime in this case, it seems a 3rd casting and placement of a new bell was beyond all involved. Instead, over 3 years, the Big Ben bell was slowly repaired in situ, with the cracked area turned away from the striker. The bell in the tower today is still the Big Ben that split on that day. On that note, why is it called Big Ben? Originally, it is thought the bell would have been named Victoria, after Queen Victoria. But perhaps the idea of striking a royal, even if only in name, was a bit much for the British sensibility of the era. The Big Ben moniker has two possible origins. One is that it was named after an MP, Sir Benjamin Hall, who, as the story goes, had just finished delivering a speech in Parliament in a session called to name the bell, when somebody called out, "Why not call him Big Ben and have done with it?" While the second possibility is that of Ben Cornt, a heavyweight boxing champion of the time, weighing in at 108 kilograms and once lasting 60 rounds in a bout. He also had the nickname of Big Ben. Regardless of which Ben inspired the name, Big Ben wasn't even the first nicknamed bell in London. The Old Tom Bell was the name given to a previous bell in a previous bell tower in Westminster. Dating back to at least the 1360s, this clock tower only had a single face and wasn't as grand as what was to come. By 1698, the tower was sold off, and the bell sold to the St. Paul's Cathedral. And, as luck would have it, the bell was damaged during transport and required repair from the Whitechapel Bell Factory. To finish the story up, one final fun fact about Big Ben. The BBC broadcasts the 6 p.m. and midnight bell tolls over Radio 4. Due to the speed of radio transmission versus that of a normal sound wave, if you were to stand near Big Ben, listening to the radio during one of those times, you would hear the bell over the radio a split second before you heard it in person. Now for a song pairing. Although I was originally thinking the rather obvious For Whom the Bell Tolls, I think instead The Little Bell by Broadcast is a better fit, especially with lyrics, "But from a careless hand it rocked, its shell is only made of crock, although it lies there split in two, it still tries to ring out to you," which seems a fitting remembrance for the original Big Ben and the split in the current bell. Friday, the 11th of April. On this day, not year, a 152 kilogram or 335 pound scone had been stolen and was found far from home. The theft occurred December 1950 on Christmas Day. 4 students, Ian Hamilton, Gavin Vernon, Kay Matheson and Alan Stewart, from the University of Glasgow, had travelled from Scotland to break into the very heart of English Parliament, the redesigned building from our previous story, Westminster. This wasn't their first attempt at infiltration. December 23rd, Ian had waited inside the building after closing, stealthily avoiding detection by hiding under a trolley. That is, until a guard confused him with a rough sleeper, gave him some change, and sent him on his way. December 24th, Gavin and Alan made a second attempt to be locked in, but were shooed away on closing. This infiltration method being thwarted, the group decided a more direct approach was required. They found this in a crowbar. This time, Ian, Gavin and Alan broke into the building through a builder's yard, grabbing a crowbar as they went to force open a door. Although they knew the guards' shifts, they tried to keep as quiet as possible. But surely tempers must have risen as they were forced to creep by the tomb of King Edward I. Although he had died 643 years prior, it was thanks to him that they were there that night. His actions had resulted in them forcing their way into the building, making their way towards the coronation chair, all to retrieve something precious to them, a rock. Now, when I say rock, I don't mean precious gemstones, no. This was a 152 kilogram, 66 by 42 by 27 centimetre, or 26 by 16 by 10 inch, chunk of red sandstone. But it had a longer history than the building it was currently sitting in. What the thieves were targeting was the Stone of Scone, or Stone of Destiny, or Coronation Stone, a rock that traditionally was part of the coronation ceremony for a new Scottish king. Over the years, the stone had built up quite a legend. From a 1951 article from the Weekly Overseas Mail, republished in the Musselbrook Chronicle newspaper of New South Wales. According to medieval writers, the Stone of Scone was Jacob's pillow when he saw the angels ascending and descending the ladder. It passed to Pharaoh and was later carried to Ireland by Simon the Wolf. In AD 498, it crossed to Scotland, where for centuries it was the coronation seat for most Scottish kings. That is, until 1296 at least. King Edward I, the occupier of the crypt they had crept by just prior, had been waging a war against Scotland, and the Stone of Scone was something he seized in victory. A chair was made to house it, completed in 1300, and the gilded wooden throne became part of the English coronation, symbolically seating themselves on the prior symbol of Scottish rule, a way to say that they were the new monarchs of Scotland. Which is why Ian, Gavin, Kay and Alan wanted to take it back. As they grabbed the stone, hauling it off the chair, they discovered it came away in two pieces, a larger 112 kilogram piece and a smaller 40 kilogram chunk. It is thought that this split came about, or was at least helped along, by the suffragettes in 1914. A common tactic of theirs, to raise the issue of gender equality and votes for women, was through explosives. Shoulder to shoulder into the fray indeed. June 11th, 1914, a bomb, loaded with shrapnel, had been placed next to the coronation chair, and the Stone of Scone seated upon it. On its explosion, it tore a chunk of the chair apart, and may have helped along a crack in the stone that had been forming since at least 1868. Ian ran the smaller piece out to Kay in the car, while Gavin and Alan used Ian's jacket to drag the larger segment through the building. Just as Ian had stowed the stone, a policeman rounded the corner. With some quick acting, Ian and Kay embraced, the perfect picture of two lovers in a parked car outside Parliament. The policeman moved them on. Ian doubled back to help the other two, while Kay made her own getaway. After some further drama, and a lost pair of keys that had fallen out inside the building, the larger piece of the stone was also finally on the move. The following morning, on realizing the stone was stolen, and the most likely culprit, the border between England and Scotland was closed, for the first time in 400 years. The pieces were eventually taken to Robert Gray, a Scottish politician and stonemason, who had made an attempt at stealing the stone himself years prior. Gray was able to piece the stone back together with a hollow metal rod. The story goes the rod contains a message written by Gray, but what it reads, or if it even exists, still remain a mystery. 4 months later, police received word. The Stone of Scone had been left at Arbroath Abbey, the location of the Declaration of Arbroath of 1320, in which the Pope was asked to recognise Scotland's independence and their own rule. The police arrived on this day, April 11th, 1951, to find the stone of Scone draped in a Scottish flag. While it was returned to England shortly after, ultimately this theft had raised a lot of new conversations around the stone, before finally, in 1996, on behalf of Queen Elizabeth II, the stone of Scone was returned home. The only song I can choose to pair with this story is, and hopefully I don't butcher this too much, Oran na Kalaruka, or Song of the Stone, by Kathleen MacInnes. The song, written by poet Donald McIntyre, tells the story of the above story. Saturday, April 12th. On this day, not year, these soldiers weren't kept in suspense much longer. Today's story finds us in Broughton, a district of Salford, Greater Manchester, England. This time of year is particularly chilly, with an average high of 12 degrees Celsius and a low of 4, or 53 to 39 Fahrenheit. To the south of us, about a 2-mile or 3-kilometre walk away, is the city of Pendleton. While it would be lovely to take a quick jaunt over, there's just one problem stopping us. River Irwell. Fortunately, we weren't the only ones facing this problem, as, in 1826, a rather well-off local, John Fitzgerald, was facing this same issue. But he had a rather practical solution. Build a bridge and get over it. So, with his own money, the Broughton Suspension Bridge was constructed. At 44 metres, 144 feet long, and 5 metres, or 18 feet wide, the bridge was more than enough to accommodate all that wanted to use it, or all that could afford to use it. John demanded a toll for use, as one often doesn't become wealthy enough to construct their own bridge through charity alone. This wasn't any ordinary bridge either, but an iron chain-link suspension bridge, which at the time was at the forefront of bridge technology. It was this very design that would lead to its literal downfall on this day, April 12th in 1831, just 5 short years after the bridge had opened. The British Army's 60th Royal Rifle Corps were performing an exercise on Kersal Moor, to the northeast of Broughton. After they had finished, they had to march back to their barracks in Salford, across the Broughton Suspension Bridge. Fortunately, the Corps were under the command of Lieutenant Percy Slingsby Fitzgerald, the son of bridge owner John Fitzgerald, and so he could likely waive the toll, or at least get the 74 soldiers a discount. The soldiers, standing 4 abreast, began marching across the bridge. Left, right, left, right. Their footwork soon began moving the bridge, vibrating it. Finding this funny, the soldiers started singing a marching tune and stepping to the rhythm, until a sound resembling an irregular discharge of firearms rang out across the river. The soldiers weren't under fire, but they were soon under water. Their marching had set up something known as mechanical resonance, which, as per Wikipedia, is the tendency of a mechanical system to respond at great amplitude when the frequency of its oscillations matches the system's natural frequency of vibration. In other words, their marching had quite literally vibrated the bridge apart, ripping the anchoring chains free and destroying all structural integrity. Of the 76 soldiers, 40 were dropped 5 metres, or 18 feet below, into the cold waters of River Irwell. Fortunately, the water wasn't as deep as usual, with a depth of only 60 centimetres, or 2 feet. While nobody was killed, several soldiers suffered broken bones or head injuries. This incident led to a new rule for the British Army. that all marching troops must break step, that is, stop marching in unison, when crossing a bridge. The perfect pairing for this story can be found in the 1967 animated movie The Jungle Book. I put it to you, my dear listener, that Colonel Hathi's March, or the Elephant Song, is the perfect pairing and visualization for the soldiers crossing the bridge. Sunday, April 13th. On this day, not year, a marathon comes to an end, and this day ends in a sprint. Despite what you may expect, ping pong, table tennis, gossamer or whiff-waff, whatever you want to call it, was a sport invented in England, supposedly as a parlour game among the upper class. Books would make the net, wine corks the ball, while cigar boxes were used as bats. The equipment has changed and evolved over the years, but it is still very recognizable today as the sport it started off as. Why am I whiff-waffing on about the history of ping pong? Well, it's because on this day, April 13th, back in 1979, the longest game of ping-pong doubles had just finished. Maybe. GuinnessWorldRecord.com lists the longest table tennis doubles marathon is 101 hours, 1 minute and 11 seconds by Lance, Phil and Mark Warren and Bill Weir, all USA, at Sacramento, California, USA, on 9th to the 13th April 1979. But that's the entirety of the information available. Attempts to find more information only seem to lead back to the Guinness Record website, which only makes this record even more mysterious. The only other information that wasn't just a regurgitation of the Guinness World Record website was on WindermereCALocal.com, which appears to be the leading independent real estate brokerage company in Greater Sacramento. A January 25th, 2019 post on their website is titled 15 Cool and Crazy Guinness World Records Held in the State of California, and it details the record in greater detail. Mark, Phil, and Lance are all brothers, the Warrens. Together with their good friend Bill Weir, set the record of longest doubles match at 72 hours, only for that record to be smashed, the new one being set at 100 hours a few years later. Not willing to let this ping go unponged, the quartet were determined to beat this new record and reclaim the title, which, if you can believe Guinness World Records, they accomplished on this day back in 1979. Real or not, this has been just a story about ping pong, and so the only song that can match is the hit by Operator Please, Just a Song About Ping Pong. Okie dokie, home stretch now, people. But before we end, I hope you've been paying attention, because we have the quiz and a plane. Pens and paper at the ready. Let's see how you do this week. Question 1 from Monday. Bobby McMahon was the cargo foreman at JFK International Airport. But what nickname did he go by? Question 2 for Tuesday. Although depicted as armless, the Venus de Milo statue was found near one of her arms. But what was that arm holding in its hand? Question 3 from Wednesday. What did de Martinville's phonograph trace its recordings in? Question 4 from Thursday. How many bells, in total, are installed in the Elizabeth Tower? Question 5 from Friday. Who was the English king that stole the stone from Scotland? Question 6 from Saturday. What type of bridge was the star of our Saturday story? And finally, question 7 from Sunday. What was just one item that the original ping pong was played with? Got your answers down? Feel free to rewind otherwise. Here are the answers. The answer to question 1 from Monday. Bobby McMahon went by the nickname Frenchie. Answer 2 from Tuesday. The arm of Venus de Milo was holding an apple. Answer 3 from Wednesday. The phone autograph traced its recordings in lamp black, or soot or carbon. Answer 4 from Thursday. There are 5 bells in the Elizabeth Tower, 4 quarter bells and 1 Big Ben. Answer 5 for Friday. The king that stole the stone was King Edward I. Answer 6 for Saturday. A suspension bridge. Or a chain link suspension bridge if you want to be specific. And finally, answer 7 for Sunday. Ping pong was played with books for a net, a cork for a ball, and cigar boxes for bats. Which brings us to the end of another episode of This Day, Not Year. Hopefully you fared alright in the quiz, or at the very least enjoyed yourself along the way, and can take away a new fact or two from the episode. As usual, thisdaynotyear@gmail.com if you have any corrections, or just want to drop a line. If you're feeling generous, I ask that you rate the podcast on your player of choice. Or if you're feeling extroverted, maybe share the episode and podcast with a friend or family member. In either case, thank you for listening. I've been Adam, and I'll be back with another episode next week as we look back at the history of 14th to the 20th of April. Until then, have an historic week. Goodbye.